Sarah had recently rescued an animal she thought was a puppy. He was caked in mud and his fur was super matted, so the first order of business would be taking it to the groomer. But as the groomer worked on the animal, he started realizing that the creature was not a dog at all. When he finally figured out what it was, he was shocked. Welcome to Wonderbot Animals. James had been grooming animals for years, and he had seen a few awful cases. When Sarah walked into the door with her rescued puppy, he was confident that he could give the dog a full makeover. But when James started working, he noticed a few things that made him suspicious. The animal had some characteristics that were very different from the characteristics of a dog. Now, at first he brushed the thoughts aside and continued grooming the animal. Well, he tried to, until something caught his attention. This time, he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. So James decided to ask Sarah a few questions. When she couldn't answer, it was clear to the groomer that something was up. Suddenly, the energy in the room changed, and Sarah looked very nervous all of a sudden. She definitely sensed James's suspicion. Then he asked one final question. "Where did you find this creature?" Sarah's answer would be a big surprise. Sarah had always loved exploring the forest that surrounded her small town. She had lived there all her life and knew every inch of the dense, tangled wilderness like the back of her hand. However, on that day, she decided to take a new route. This is how she would discover her new dog. Along the way, Sarah came across a cave that piqued her interest. She was very curious about it, so she decided to explore it. The cave was dark and cold, but Sarah didn't mind. She loved discovering new spaces in the forest, and she had never seen that cave before. Little did she know that something unusual was waiting for her inside the cave. As Sarah moved deeper into the cave, she began to feel very uneasy. The air was cool and musty, and the darkness seemed to press in on her from all sides. But despite her growing sense of dread, Sarah refused to turn back. She was determined to get to the heart of the cave. A few minutes later, Sarah finally came to a large chamber in the center of the cave. She was quite overwhelmed by the size of it. She had never been in a cave like this before, so it was impressive. But not much later, this feeling of awe would turn into fear. When Sarah's eyes adjusted to the darkness, she could see an outline of an animal in the cave, and it looked very peculiar. As far as she could see, the creature had a long, snout-like nose, a furry coat, and large, floppy ears, which seemed to move a lot. Sarah had never seen an animal like that one before, so she decided that she would bring it home with her. The animal didn't seem aggressive, and it allowed Sarah to carry it in her arms. As they got out of the cave, the animal was startled by the sunlight and jumped out of Sarah's arms. The creature ran back into the cave, and Sarah didn't think twice about going after it. Back inside the cave, the animal had hidden in a corner. It was clear that being outside scared it, but Sarah picked it back up very gently and started walking out. This time, Sarah moved slower to give the creature time to adjust to the change of scenery. Fortunately, it worked, and the animal was at ease. Now that Sarah could see the animal better than inside the cave, she really wasn't sure if it was a dog or not. She thought it was a dog, but now that they were outside, she seriously doubted it. She would still bring it home with her and figure it out later. To get home, Sarah had to walk through the town with the creature in her arms, and people all around her stopped and stared at the odd animal. Some people even stopped and asked if it was a dog, but Sarah only smiled, shrugged, and kept moving because she didn't know. When Sarah got home, she carefully placed the animal on a soft blanket and started grooming it. Its fur was very matted, and the creature was caked in dirt and mud. As she worked, she realized that the creature looked very exotic. It was beautiful too, under all of that dirt and hair. Finally, after several hours of grooming, the animal's fur looked a bit better. Now, Sarah wanted to see if she could find what kind of animal it was because she was certain it wasn't a dog. So she got her laptop and started searching. Unfortunately, she wouldn't find any concrete answers. That's when she decided to go to the groomer. Now, as mentioned earlier, James was shocked by the creature, but Sarah decided to take it back home. Now, before we continue, don't forget to like this video to help it reach 10K, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. A while later, Sarah hears a knock on the door. It was the police. Turns out that someone had called about the strange animal, probably the groomer. While she was talking to the police at the door, it seemed that the animal got spooked and it jumped out the window. Determined to find it, Sarah set out into the woods surrounding her house. She hoped the police would help her, but when she asked the officers, they refused to help her. Sarah returned to the forest and searched for hours, following tracks and scanning the trees for any sign of the creature. Unfortunately, she couldn't find any trace of the animal, so she started feeling helpless. Eventually, though, she managed to find the animal. It had gone back into the cave. And it turns out it had children. Sarah hadn't seen them in the dark before. She decided to bring them all home. They clearly needed help. Now, at first, everything seemed to be going well. Sarah worked tirelessly to feed and care for the creatures, and soon they began to thrive. But as night fell, the creatures became more active and made a lot of noise. The next day, there was a knock on the door again. It was the police. They had gotten a noise complaint. They wanted to go inside her home and investigate. Sarah tried to stop them, but the officers were determined to get into her house. They walked past her, and when they entered, they were surprised to find the creatures Sarah was hiding. Sarah tried to explain, but the officers escorted her out of the house and into a police car. When she looked over her shoulder, she saw that the police officers were being too aggressive with the animals. Sarah was afraid of being thrown in jail, but she remained calm and refused to speak to anyone until she had a lawyer. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Sarah's lawyer arrived, and she hoped that this awful experience would end quickly. Her lawyer listened to her story, and he reassured her that she did nothing wrong, so she wouldn't end up in jail. She didn't break any laws. The officers were just trying to scare her to get information. So that's what she decided to do. With her attorney at her side, Sarah explained the whole situation to the officers. She asked them to just let her talk and listen as she recounted how she found the creatures. Then, she asked why they were so interested in the creatures. But before the officer could start talking, a couple of other officers got into the interrogation room. They were worried, and they said one of the creatures wasn't doing well. Sarah demanded to see the creatures, but before they did that, the officer finally explained what was happening. It turns out that Sarah had found a rare breed of dog that dates back to prehistoric times. That's why the groomer was so surprised, and why the police were so interested in the animals. When Sarah was finally brought to the creatures, one of the officers reassured her that everything was fine. It was only a false alarm. The animals actually seemed very healthy. Sarah was scared to ask if she could keep the animals, but she did anyway. Fortunately, she was allowed to keep the pups under the condition that she would give them a loving home. She was very grateful for that because she had become attached to the animals during that whole ordeal. Isn't that strange how things just work out? One day, Sarah was just walking through the woods, and then the next day, she had a family of rare dogs that she loved very much. Would you have rescued the strange animals? Let us know in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to like the video, share it, and make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any future uploads. Until the next one.